All right, with that, quick introduction. So my name is Tushar Bansal. I lead the services business at Content Square. And I joined Content Square through Heap acquisition, which is the product analytics part of our platform. And we'll start with some quick introductions. And I would request our panelists, when they introduce themselves, include your company, your role, and a fun fact about yourself. I can start with my fun fact. So I was part of a similar session, similar product panel 2 weeks back, and I was on the other side. I was answering questions as a practitioner because again I've done this for a while. But today I have an easier job. I get to ask questions and then just sit back. So with that, let's start with you, Timo.
Hi everyone, I'm Timo. I feel a bit less bad about standing between you and drinks, seeing as some people have already brought their own cocktails to this session, which is great. So I work for Seek, which hopefully many of you will have heard about. So Seek is a leading employment platform. We operate across 8 countries in ANZ and across APAC. My job, senior head of product, is not particularly instructive as these job titles are. So I look after a range of teams that manage kind of part of our experience. So I have the privilege of looking after, we try and kind of set up our organization kind of along the customer journey, and I have the privilege of sitting right at the heart of that. So I have some teams that focus on candidate-facing product, so things like the candidate profile, the job application flow, and then where those things go on the hirer side. So things like our applicant management system, our proactive sourcing tool, so the database where people can proactively look for candidates, and then a bunch of smaller new models that we're experimenting with. And my fun fact is that I moved to Australia 7 years ago for the job with Seek. And when I started looking for, well, before that, I'm originally from Holland. Before that, I was in London for a long time. Worked for read.co.uk, which is also an employment marketplace. And when I started looking for jobs in Australia, my one requirement was anything but Seek, because I didn't want to kind of pigeonhole myself and stay in the industry. But then I got the opportunity to chat to someone at Seek and was convinced that it was the right place for me to go. And I'm still there 7 years later. So
awesome. I guess we have another connection. The session I was talking about, it was in Netherlands.
I'm sure you got loads of direct responses from people. I'm a bit in the middle between a British and a Dutch person now. So
that's a really lovely story. I don't have anything to match it. But hi everyone, my name's Nadine and I work at ReachOut. Probably less familiar, a little bit different to the other industries that are presenting here today. ReachOut is a digital mental health service, born digital, always been online, been around for about 25 years. We mostly work with young people, so we make support a lot more accessible through online resources and some services. More recently, we stood up a service that's called Peer Chat. It's a one-on-one text-based conversation between a young person who might be seeking mental health support and a trained peer worker who has lived experience themselves. So yeah, I'm the product lead on that. And yeah, there's also a provision of resources for parents and carers and educators. Yeah, that's a bit about my day-to-day, where I'm from, a little bit different to other people presenting here for sure, although Timo has helped me see what Seek do a little bit differently as well, so in the for-purpose space. And I don't have a fun fact, but I'm going to probably speak to something that happened yesterday. I had a really good conversation with somebody who just happened to be sat next to a in-house counsel for a major public service provider, who I won't name, but as in-house counsel, he was telling me that the vast majority of questions that he receives are about data, mostly around security, privacy, ethics, and how there needs to be an uplift in that space, I guess, where he works, and it touches a lot of our lives. So I was very surprised to hear that, and probably quite thankful about where ReachOut is at in their journey on those things. Yeah, that's my kind of fun. So
It is fun, and thank you. It's a purpose-driven organization doing something incredible, so thank you for that. All right, so Before we start asking questions to our panelists, please get your phones out. You have a QR code up there. We are asking very simple questions just to gauge where everyone is in their product analytics journey. So if you can get the QR code, you should see the question on your screens. All right, the first question you should see on your screen is, what's your maturity level regarding product analytics? Let's take maybe another 10 seconds. All right, so I'm seeing 56% say they're intermediate, so that's encouraging. So we have, I guess, product analytics practitioners in the room, so hoping this to be an engaging conversation. Let me ask the same question to you. Maybe let's start with you, Timo. How would you rate maturity in your organization?
We're obviously quite a relatively mature organization. We're a large company and the kind of market leader across 8 markets. I'm kind of hoping that we're advanced. I think most of my team would say that. Obviously, any organization's always kind of in a state of flux on this stuff. So there's plenty that I'm sure we'll get into where I would say, oh, I wish we were better at this, or I wish we were better at that. But I think for us, like, we expect product managers, for example, to really manage that side of the product. So we expect product managers to really understand how their product works, how it fits in the broader marketplace, what the key metrics are that drive their product, how those things are moving, and also to spot things like anomalies, like something weird's happening in this segment or in this market. When we think about new product changes or launches, there's usually a good focus on what metrics should this move, what does success look like, how long do we need to test in order to get to statistical significance, those kind of things. So, yeah, I wouldn't say perfect, but on a 3-choice architecture like that, probably on the advanced side.
I like the honesty. Normally, I think I see everyone has a tendency to be more modest, and I'm not saying you're not modest, but I appreciate the honesty. All right, Nadine, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I like this passing mic business. Gives me a chance to think. I would say for the size of our team, we're pretty good. I think we've gotten better over the past 5 or so years. There's been a really good uplift in data literacy generally around the organisation. It's been reinforced by really good ritualistic practices and the fact that everyone's interested in how to support young people in a faster way, reaching the right young people at the right time with the right product or intervention is a very compelling reason to know your data really well. And for us, that's a really good combination of quant and qual. Obviously, qualitative data is really very much at the heart of what we do. But that's, only reinforces and deepens the insights that we have from quant, that we're creating the right, interventions and services. Yeah.
Right. And if I maybe just expand on the same question a little bit more. So when it comes to, again, product analytics, how is your product team is organizing and analyzing user behavior data, like given the complexity? And you mentioned scale. Maybe if you can share with the audience the scale of your team and how, again, the data is organized and how you're using or analyzing user behavior. Would love to get your thoughts.
Sure. I think it's a very interesting one for us because we obviously look at a lot of similar things that a lot of people will be talking about here today. We have the same pain points for a lot of our funnels where they are linear, but actually, broadly, we don't have a lot of linear flows. That's because mental health needs can be quite spontaneous or circumstantial. So the vast majority of our service users are single-time users. But then we have products like like ReachOut or services, or products or services, like PeerChat, I should say, the text-based conversation, where we have a bit more depth of engagement. So we do see that repeat behaviour, and in that context, I suppose we do need to understand user behaviour data a lot more. One of the things that we come up against is once you're capturing every single interaction through an analytics platform, how do you do that responsibly becomes our challenge. So for us, there's kind of two parts. One, we collect very minimal data by design. And then the other part is once we're capturing that and looking at user interactions so that we can help improve how young people use the service, we are making sure that you can either out of the box or through to one-time config redact the sensitive parts of what's going on for that young person, especially the conversation itself. So redacting while still being able to look at every other interaction and improving that funnel, which is, you know, their ability to come back and use the service or how they signed up in the first place, and whether that means they're more likely to be a no-show or a cancel, understanding the difference between, you know, signing up via email or phone number, which happened in our previous booked model before we released the new on-demand modality. Yeah, it was really important. So how do we do that responsibly? You also asked a question about scale, I think.
Yeah, so you mentioned obviously the complexity and the scale of your organization. So just to get an idea, if you can elaborate on that.
So like our BI team, you know, is quite small. We have, you know, one data analyst. We have a very, very small product team. There's, I guess it's been joined or augmented by a few other people in the organisation, so it's become a bit more of an experienced team, where we have research and evaluation, product design, but yeah, not comparable to, you know.
Yeah, but I think that's also interesting, right? I mean, so I think a big takeaway here is whether you're a big organization with a lot of complexity or a small organization, I think ultimately being data-driven is the way to be efficient and make an impact, right? So I think that's good to understand. Anything you want to add to that, Timo, when it comes to Seek and how you are organized and how you're using?
Yeah, I can talk a bit. That this might get into some of the other questions you might ask later, but I can talk a bit about how we kind of typically organize around data and how we deal with data as a group. So as I mentioned, largely the way that our product teams are set up is along parts of the user journey. But obviously in a marketplace business, like every one side of the marketplace impacts the other. We're a kind of organization that's very impacted by macros. We can only capture so many job ads as there are vacancies out in the market. And so like kind of understanding more broadly what's happening in the market, understanding if it's a candidate long or a candidate short market, that really changes candidate behavior. You might either have to apply for lots of jobs or not many jobs in order to stand out. And so what we do, we have a good cadence on a monthly level is get the whole product and analytics team together to talk about exactly that. So how are we tracking what's happening in the broader market? What are we seeing there? And then for our key products, what are we seeing in those funnels? So if I take an example, like one of my teams, which is the team that looks after job apply flow, obviously the main thing they control is how many people do we convert through? Like from the point that people enter the apply flow, how many people come out the other way? And most of that can be controlled by us. Some of it's maybe a bit related to motivation given the market, but most of it's us. But how much goes into the top of the funnel is actually like much more that sits with what's happening in the broader market, how are we faring against our competitors, how well are we acquiring candidates, how well are we doing from a matching perspective to show them jobs that they want to apply for in the first place. And so it's quite complex when you have all of those things hang together. But that's why we try and spend time with the whole team talking about those things, just so people don't just focus on the thing that they control, but also really understand what's happening elsewhere and how their kind of contribution impacts other parts of our business.
Yeah, I think, and this is also very important, right? And this is part of building the data-driven culture where you want to democratize the access, you want people being able to answer their ad hoc questions, but at the same time building a culture where it doesn't become siloed. So I think that's a very good example of how you're handling it. Any example you can share? Any moment where a particular data insight changed your decision or influence a roadmap in a different direction than your initially hypothesis? I would love to hear.
Service, looking at the chat distribution range, taking a time-based kind of interval approach and trying to understand really what is going on here. Like, we are surpassing the utilization model, but we don't really know what the engagement depth is like in those chats. And we had kind of hypothesized around a correlation between longer chats and more positive outcomes. We knew that from other services that we had. The insight is that, you know, the greater therapeutic benefit would come from deeper engagement, so longer chats. But what we found instead was that actually there were these kind of null zones, maybe between about 10 to 19 minutes, where because we'd surpassed the utilization model, our expectation and our ability to deliver on those chats, we had these kind of null zones where a young person might have been told that there was a queue, said they were happy to wait, but by the time a peer worker was available to kind of chat to them, we had all these either declared kind of, I need to go now because, you know, it's dinner time, you know, we are talking about a young person's world, or these drop-offs with unknown agenda. You know, we didn't know why they were there in the first place. We know that they kind of had to leave, and that allowed us to really focus on a few things. We discovered quite a lot. Like, our hypothesis was invalidated because we didn't know what was happening with this cohort of young people who were waiting, and we needed to offer them something. So we obviously took that as needing to work on the young person's experience while they're waiting. There's a range of possibilities there. In a young person's world, it can look like distraction, offering them a game, referring to them to another part of the service if they have a question that can be answered, where they had previously thought they might need a longer conversation, but actually there's another part of the service which can answer that question a bit quicker. And then offering them a way back into the service when they are in a queue. You know, can you come back in through, if you're opting in, to get an SMS. So that really allowed us to focus on that side of things and improve that kind of null zone. It was definitely surprising for us because all the numbers were actually looking quite good. So uncritically, we were just doing really well. And the other part that we discovered through this time-based eval was that the peer work team was classifying conversations in a way that didn't give us enough granularity about what was actually occurring either. So we went back in and with the team co-designed a whole new classification schema that allows us to understand a lot better from, and in a much more standardized way, you know, what is going on in those conversations, particularly where there's, you know, interventions required, where, so duty of care is really big for us, and we need to be able to keep track of, you know, how many escalations occurred, where young people are waiting, and yeah, it's a whole new schema now. So it really uncovered a few things for us.
That's a lot of, I would say, action on the data or the insight, right? So that's great. Awesome. With that, I guess time for our next poll. So again, if you pick up your phones, the next question is, what's your biggest challenge with product analytics today? We'll again let's take another 10 seconds. I don't want to do the countdown. Maybe I can. Oh, I think the themes are broadly, I think we see a good split. I think so. This is a little different from what I normally see. I think normally I see a lot of votes against too much data or not knowing what data to focus on. But I think lack of alignment between teams is an emerging theme. Okay, I'll stop looking at this. I think the trends are changing a lot. But at the back of it, would love to hear from you in terms of biggest challenges. I think two themes that come up are one, obviously, the data overload, and the second is alignment between teams. So curious to get your thoughts. What kind of challenges have you seen and how you overcome those?
Yeah, I can probably combine those two. So hopefully that's helpful. So there's a bit, like I said, we have these sessions now that we really kind of share with the broader team. So that's created a lot more alignment over the last couple of years. But there's still an element of different departments. Like we have we've always had a pretty big investment in AI, or at least for as long as I've been with Seek. So before the AI hype train. So we have a pretty big AI team that's been around for a good number of years and kind of where it started from like machine learning kind of beginnings and that kind of thing. And so often there you get very specific metrics that are maybe not quite the same as what the kind of experienced team on the other side measure. And so there's still a challenge with alignment there. Typically when you work with data scientists, I hope I'm not offending anyone in the room, what they really like is a very clear metric that you're trying to optimize for, to say, oh, there's this one thing and that's what we're trying to drive. And it's really hard in a marketplace business and in a business that has search and in a business around employment to really define metrics that have no downside. So if you think about a job platform, more job searches, is that a good or a bad thing? Well, it could be a good thing because people might be more engaged, or it could be a bad thing because people are struggling to find the right thing. More job applications, same thing. Is it just that people are not getting to any success and they just kind of have to kind of scattergun their way there? Or is it that people are more engaged, finding more jobs that they're interested in that they want to apply for? And so it's very hard sometimes to find metrics that are like unequivocally good. Or if you can, it's really hard to capture those metrics. So one of the, it's getting better, but one of the really big challenges in digital kind of recruitment is that you often don't know the outcome. So at some point, once people have found each other, they go off platform to like interviews and that kind of thing. So one of those metrics that would be uncontroversially good if that went up is placements. But it's sometimes really hard to get accurate data on that and to optimize for that. And so you often start optimizing for proxies, and then getting teams to align on what proxies are the most important is one part. And then I think the other thing that is a challenge for us, particularly now that we've become this APAC business, is understanding where to look. Because obviously if you think about, like if you're running your metric sessions monthly, you've got a lot of customers on the candidate side, a lot of customers on the hirer side. You've got on the candidate side web, iOS, Android. You've got these 8 different markets. You've got different segments, like people in more senior roles, people in junior roles, high-paying roles, low-paying roles, lots of different ways that you can cut this. And so there's often, one of the challenges is like, what's the most instructive kind of angle to look at? And how high up can you start to make the story kind of clear to say, oh, this is something interesting here. Now we should drill down and figure out, okay, something's happening in that market. Let's figure out, is it corporate roles, or is it kind of SME customers that are struggling, or is this macro, is this us? So those things, I think, take a lot of time and effort. And again, that goes back to alignment. There's lots of things like where averages, for example, like do you use an average or a median or that kind of thing, where it's like, oh, in markets where you have, if you take all of our markets together, this may be the last example I'll use, and I'll throw to Nadine. Like if you, for some things, I prefer to look at all of our markets first and then market by market. But there are some things where the market dynamics are so different that looking at all the markets together makes everything skewed by one market. So the best example that we have there is Indonesia. So Indonesia is an incredibly candidate long market. So you get kind of, on average, thousands of job applications per role. So if you said, what's our average job number of applications per role? if that's going up and down by month, that's basically only telling you what's happening in Indonesia, because it like skews everything else. And so that's a good example of where you kind of really need to understand the kind of intricacies of the kind of how the metrics hang together in the marketplace and get everyone to agree this thing's important, but we need to look at it in this specific way.
Yeah, I think, and this is also something that comes up, again, from a practitioner standpoint when I work with my customers. If you work backwards from what are you trying to answer, what is a business problem, and then you agree on how you measure success, and then based on the numbers, what actions you plan to take. I think when you work backwards and then look for the right data points, I think a lot of that becomes a lot easier, right?
I think that's true, but there's one kind of but to that, which is that is very true when you're talking about, we were talking about just before, we're coming up to a new financial year, talking about what are your company OKRs, how are you going to measure that, why do those things matter over other things? Like that is very true from that perspective. It's maybe a bit less true from the kind of diagnostic perspective. So when you're talking about, actually, we've got all these products live in all these markets, we've got a business that's operating, like is there something else that's happening? Like a lot of it is actually doesn't necessarily need to lead to action, but it's partly what that monthly session is for us, is to say, are we still right in focusing on the things that we were focusing on? Or is there something happening that should make us pivot because there's something on fire over here, there's something happening that we hadn't foreseen? So kind of true when you're really talking about we're trying to solve this problem, is that the right thing? What impact is it going to have on the business? But there is a kind of monitoring how you're kind of operating your existing products and business that's a bit outside of that.
That's fair, that's fair. All right, I'm also looking at the time here. So Nadine, if you don't mind, maybe let's do one more poll before I come to you. All right. So this is our last poll. So how does your team currently prioritize feature improvements? And we have some interesting options in there. So when we added this based on gut feeling, it was partly a joke, but I think over the last few times I've seen these polls, I feel it's not really a joke. Even, I mean, we all are claiming to do a lot of things with data, but by and large, it is true. A lot of the decision making still happens based on gut. Anyways, I'll look at the results one more time. So based on stakeholder requests, which makes sense. I think this tends to be the common winner whenever we have this discussion. So Nadine, let me come to you. So first of all, again, same question. How are decisions made in your organization? And then maybe a follow-up to that would be, how do you make sure once you have the insights that decision-making happens? You kind of partially answered that in your previous responses, but if you can maybe go a little bit more deeper, because this is, again, one big struggle we see with our customers, where we have the insights, but how we take that insights to action often is where the breakdown happens.
Yeah, it's not an easy one, because there are lots of insights. So I think it's a little bit linked to the previous question, actually, because for us, the metrics that matter are impact metrics, and that helps ground our decision-making processes in what will shift that impact. So yeah, we have a social impact framework. It's about 3 years old. It continuously measures reach, engagement, and outcomes. It means that we have to embed some of those, some of the ability to evaluate those outcomes in the products. So if you're a young person who's just finished a chat with a lived experience peer worker, we have a general satisfaction question. We also have a post-chat check-in, you know, how are you doing now that you've had that? And then we have one question that's based around core impact. And it's meant to measure things that are actually quite traditionally hard to measure, things like validation. I mean, how do you measure for validation? So we ask, you know, did you feel, or to the effect, this isn't the exact question, but, did you feel heard in that conversation? And those three things together, help us both speak the same language where it comes to metrics that matter, but also prioritize what's next. So if we are not meeting that, core impact measure of validation, then, that might lead to an internal or an external val, or a re-evaluation of prioritizing what's next for that service. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I'm realizing we have a lot of questions for you both, but we don't have a lot of time. So let's see how many we can answer. By the way, you have to appreciate, I went through this full session without talking AI. But with that, I think probably it is the most voted question here. So the first question, are there creative ways you are using AI for quantitative analysis? Any one of you?
I might take a little quick detour, because you said you put in the gut feeling question response in there as a joke, and I actually wanted to make a point of that related to AI, which is, at least the way I think about it, like partly as a product person and the way that I think about the product people in my team, you're partly paid for your intuition. Like product intuition is a real thing, and so gut feel is actually quite important. And if not, actually AI could probably take all the quant and qual inputs and make the decision. So I probably feel a bit less bearish on the future of product managers, because the intuition's actually like an important part of it, but you want to combine it with those other things. So in terms of using AI, there's, like I said, we've been a big kind of AI-led company for a longer period of time, and so we use it a lot in our products, but we're now, just like any other company, really thinking about, with all of these new tools, how do we embed it in our way of working as well. So we're starting to use things like large language models to understand and analyze our kind of data and where we could focus, or to summarize things like customer feedback and really kind of say, hey, here are all the verbatim comments that we had on our NPS kind of feedback in the last month. What are the real big themes, and how do they relate to the things that we're working on, that kind of thing. I think I've been having some conversations with people about this who have mentioned that I think in Australia we're a bit slow on the adoption of this. I feel like in the States people are a lot more kind of ahead of that part. What I see in our company is partly not to the same level as you, but we do hold a lot of quite sensitive data about people, and so to an extent we've kind of constrained usage of a bunch of those things, because we don't want that data to end up in places where we can't control it. So it's taken a while for us to build these internal tools, but one of the things that we've launched in the last couple of months is an internal tool that allows you to leverage a bunch of these large language models like Claude and Llama and ChatGPT to do a whole bunch of these things, but have it kind of in an instance that is kind of protected, so the data is not shared back with those large language models. But there's probably a lot further to go with that still. But at the moment, it's more kind of for synthesizing large amounts of qualitative or quantitative data and help pull out some insights.
Great, no, thank you. Maybe I'll go to Nadine for the next question. So you touched a little bit upon that previously as well. So given the sensitivity of the data you have, how does ReachOut use data to inform its product?
Yeah, we use it like all other product teams. It would be a very shorthand way of answering that. The longer response is probably really anchored in definitely the sensitive and personally identifying kind of data that we collect and might store. We adhere to a bunch of frameworks. They're internal and external. One of them is the National Safety and Quality Mental Health Standards. We also voluntarily comply with some state regulations, which means we keep care-related data for a certain amount of years where there are escalations involved. And when I talk about escalations, it means a young person is at risk of harm, or someone around them is at risk of harm, so it may have been escalated to an external service like the police or child protection services. Very sensitive data. So in those instances, it's about safety of the young person. So that's how we would use that data to inform what we do. But in terms of product improvements, we're very much looking at a lot of similar things that you've heard today. There's so many overlaps in like product problems to solve, but really, really anchored in the sensitive nature of the data we do collect. How long should we keep it for? When should we let go of it? We have an internal data ethics framework that is really, really excellent for us in terms of the way we're able to escalate questions that we can't ourselves answer. So they might need to go not quite up the chain, but around the organisation. I have a colleague, Christy, who spoke last year in depth at this conference about the data ethics framework. So if you're interested in that, definitely have a watch of her talk, because it's been excellent in terms of guiding principles and how we use data, where we use it, where we let it go. It helped me recently with a really big data migration project because I needed to think about what we do with data both in transit and at rest, and it helped me answer some of those questions that we had. So many internal and external both regulatory things, but beyond that, having a very internally driven position. If you work really closely with data, you would have either developed a sense or need to very quickly develop your own sense of how you think and feel and act with it, and it has to be contextualized within your audiences and what you do in your workplace. Yeah.
Great. By the way, a fun fact, right? So I love the fact you have that data ethics framework. I think this is something maybe we all need to embrace. So fun fact, more personal. So last time I was in Australia, this was 18 years back, and I was a student, and my thesis was ethics of robots. We were speculating in the future, robots can do all this autonomous stuff. Who's responsible for what? It felt very fictional at that time, but I think 18 years later, I reflect on that. A lot of that is already true. We are already driving autonomous cars, right? So I think it's a must-have data ethics framework. So thanks for sharing that. Maybe we'll take, it says time's up. Can we take one last question? All right, so we'll take one last question. This is for you, Timo. It says, how do you benchmark against competitors like LinkedIn, Headspace, and what do you do with that insight?
Yeah, so really good question. I think Headspace would probably have been more for you, but for us, our major competitors across the region are LinkedIn and Indeed, and then beyond that, there are some local players in different markets. There's kind of Facebook and Instagram and Google that are playing in this space to some extent. So the first thing, we have one North Star metric, and as much as I said, like getting placement data is really hard, but the main thing that we look at as a company overall to kind of judge how we're doing is our placement share. And so that really says something about the kind of competitive nature of our business. So placement share means out of all the placements in a market, what proportion of those came through Seek? And on that, and that is hard to exactly pinpoint, but we use very large numbers of data that are pretty stable, so that's usually directionally pretty accurate. And we're kind of the leader in that in each of our markets. That's the main thing. And then we think about like, how do you get that? Well, by having all the jobs, by having all the candidates, and then that's where everything kind of comes from. So that's the main way that we kind of benchmark against those competitors. And then you really think about what are the specific strengths of those competitors and how do we combat them on those levels. So if I take those two examples, people probably relatively familiar with Indeed and LinkedIn. Indeed started more as an aggregator, so typically they start with a very large number of job ads. So typically when you think about them, you go, how does our job ad corpus compare to theirs? What's unique? What do we have that they don't have? What do they have that we don't have? When it comes to LinkedIn, a lot of it's around the candidate profile, which is one of the things my team look after. So that's really thinking about like what's their coverage of the labor market? What's our coverage? Roughly what can we see as like how fresh and deep is their data versus ours? But ultimately, everything always kind of comes back for us to placements, because that's ultimately the kind of unambiguous metric where kind of we win, the candidate wins, and the hirer wins. So in the marketplace, that's a pretty nice spot to be.
Great, awesome, thank you. There's so many quality questions here. I feel I haven't done justice, but we have to respect time and we have to let you all go and start the party. So we'll try and get these questions answered offline if that's okay. But thank you so much, and also please find Nadine and Timo and ask them questions during the party. And please a round of applause for both of them for sharing insights. And with that, it's time for party.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you all. Feel free to head upstairs.